I never used to think much about fear. I grew up in a small town where nothing ever really happened. And when I got older, I spent a lot of time outdoors. Hiking, camping, fishing, just enjoying the quiet. It was the one thing that made me feel like I was in control. Out there, you only had to worry about the basics: food, water, shelter. No noise, no distractions, no stress. This trip was supposed to be like any other. Just me, my truck, and the open wilderness. It was late September, the perfect time for a solo trip before the colder months set in. The place I picked was a stretch of national forest in Montana, not too far from the Idaho border. Miles and miles of open land, thick woods, and mountains stretching as far as you could see. I had done my research. There were no major trails nearby, no campgrounds, nothing. Just forest roads leading deeper into nowhere. That was what I wanted. I packed light, enough food for a few days, my sleeping bag, my tent, and some basic gear. No phone signal out there, but that was part of the appeal. I brought my rifle too, just in case. Black bears and mountain lions were around, but I wasn't too worried. I had been in the woods long enough to know how to handle myself. I got to the spot around midday, after bouncing down miles of rough dirt roads. No signs of anyone around. No tire tracks, no boot prints, nothing. It was perfect. I set up my tent in a clearing near a small stream, got a fire going, and just sat there for a while, listening to the wind move through the trees. As the sun started to dip below the trees, I decided to do a little exploring before it got too dark. I hiked up a ridge not far from camp, just to get a better lay of the land. From up there, I could see for miles, just rolling hills, thick forests, no signs of civilization anywhere. That was when I noticed something strange. About a mile away, tucked into a dense patch of trees, was a cabin. It looked old. Weathered wood, sagging roof, no smoke from a chimney. I hadn't seen anything about it on the maps I checked before the trip. It was odd, but I figured maybe it was an old hunting cabin, abandoned years ago. Still, something about it unsettled me. By the time I got back to camp, the sun was gone, and the temperature had dropped fast. I got my fire going again, cooked up some food, and sat back, letting the heat soak into me. That was when I heard it, a snap of a branch, not far, maybe 50 yards into the trees. I froze, listening. Could have been a deer, maybe a bear. I reached for my rifle, just in case, and kept my eyes on the tree line. A few minutes passed. Nothing, just the sound of the wind. Eventually, I convinced myself it was nothing and turned in for the night. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something felt off. I woke up in the middle of the night, not to a noise, just a feeling, like something was wrong. The fire had burned down to embers, casting a dim glow around my camp. I sat up, listening. The woods were dead silent. No wind, no insects, just nothing. Then I heard it. Soft, deliberate footsteps. Slow, careful, just beyond the reach of the firelight. I gripped my rifle, heart pounding. I couldn't see anything, but I knew someone, or something, was there. I stayed still, barely breathing, waiting. The footsteps stopped. Minutes passed. Then, finally, the sounds of the forest returned. A breeze moved through the trees, the distant call of an owl. I sat there for a long time, rifle in my lap, before I finally forced myself to lie back down. By morning, I had convinced myself I was just being paranoid. The isolation was getting to me, playing tricks on my mind. I decided to stay one more night, but I'd be more careful. I spent the day hiking, staying within a few miles of camp. I found an old, overgrown trail that led toward the cabin I had seen the day before. Curiosity got the better of me, so I followed it. The closer I got, the more uneasy I felt. Something about the place was wrong. The cabin was in worse shape than I had thought. Windows shattered, door hanging open. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years. But as I stepped closer, I saw something that stopped me cold. Footprints, fresh ones, not just one set, multiple, leading in and out of the cabin. I should have turned around right then, but something made me step closer. Appeared inside. The place was trashed, old furniture, broken bottles, a rusted-out stove. But then I saw something worse. A pile of bones in the corner. Not animal bones. I backed away, pulse hammering. Whoever had been here wasn't just some lost hunter. This was something else. I turned and headed straight back to camp, moving fast but trying not to panic. I needed to get out. By the time I got back, the sun was starting to set. I grabbed my gear, packed as quickly as I could. I didn't want to be there after dark. But as I threw the last of my things into the truck, I saw movement. A figure standing just at the edge of the trees. Not moving, just watching. I couldn't make out details, but I knew they were staring right at me. I didn't hesitate. I jumped into the truck, fired up the engine, and tore out of there, dirt and rocks kicking up behind me. I didn't stop, not until I hit pavement miles away. I never reported it, never told anyone. I don't know what I stumbled into out there. Some kind of backwoods cult? A killer's hideout? I don't want to know. All I know is, I'll never camp alone again. It was supposed to be a simple camping trip. Just me, my truck, and the open wilderness. I had planned for a quiet night away from everything. Work, people, noise. I drove deep into the woods, far beyond where the usual weekend campers went. I wanted to be alone, to clear my head, to sit by a fire and let the world fade away into the sound of the rain. The rain had started in the late afternoon, a light drizzle at first, then a steady downpour by the time I found a clearing to set up camp. It was a narrow space off an old dirt road, surrounded by thick trees. There were no other people around, no distant campfires or sounds of voices, just the endless rustling of leaves as rain dripped through the canopy. I parked my truck on a slight incline, making sure it wouldn't get stuck in the mud if the rain got worse. I had been in situations like that before, and I wasn't going to risk it. After grabbing my gear from the back, I set up my tent quickly, using my truck's headlights for visibility. The rain made everything more difficult. The ground was already turning soft, and my boots sank into the wet earth with every step. By the time I finished, my clothes were damp, and the cold was starting to creep in. I gathered some firewood, but keeping a fire going in the rain was almost impossible. The best I could do was a small flame, enough to cook some food and give me a little warmth. I sat on my folding chair, watching the fire flicker weakly, listening to the rain hitting the tarp I had stretched over my campsite. The forest was alive with the sounds of water, dripping, rushing, splattering against leaves and branches. But beyond that, there was something else, something subtle. At first, I thought it was just the wind shifting the trees, a faint sound, like movement, barely audible beneath the steady patter of rain. I ignored it. The woods were full of sounds. Animals, branches settling, distant water running through creeks. But as the night went on, the feeling grew. That strange, nagging sense that I wasn't alone. I told myself I was being paranoid. It was easy to feel that way when you were completely alone in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by darkness. The mind played tricks. Every sound became something more, every shadow a figure standing just out of sight. Still, I couldn't shake it. I kept my knife close, tucked into my belt, and double-checked that my truck was locked. Not that locking it would do much good out here. If someone wanted to get in, there was no one around to stop them. The rain grew heavier. I retreated to my tent, listening to the steady drumming on the fabric. My sleeping bag was warm, and exhaustion pulled at my body, but my mind refused to let go of that uneasy feeling. Then I heard it again. Not the rain, not the wind, something else. Movement, closer this time. I held my breath, listening. A slow, deliberate sound. Not an animal. Not the random creaks of shifting trees. Something was moving just outside my tent. My heart pounded. I reached for my flashlight, gripping it tightly. I didn't turn it on. Not yet. I listened, waiting. Nothing. For a long time, there was nothing but rain. I exhaled slowly, convincing myself it was just my imagination. The woods could make the smallest noises sound bigger, closer, more threatening than they were. But then it happened again. This time, it was unmistakable. Footsteps, not loud, not rushed. Careful, deliberate steps on the wet ground, just outside my tent. I stayed perfectly still. Every muscle in my body was tense, my hand wrapped so tightly around the flashlight that my knuckles ached. I kept waiting for something more, for a voice, a shadow against the tent, some confirmation that I wasn't imagining this. But there was nothing, just that lingering presence, that feeling of being watched. I swallowed hard, my breath slow and controlled. Then, in one quick motion, I flicked on the flashlight and unzipped the tent. The beam of light cut through the rain, illuminating the trees, the muddy ground. My truck parked a few feet away. Nothing else. No movement. No footprints that I could see through the puddles and mud. But the feeling didn't go away. I scanned the area, my flashlight sweeping across the woods. My fire had nearly died, leaving only faint embers glowing in the wet night. The tarp above it sagged under the weight of the rain. I stayed there for a long time, flashlight in one hand, knife in the other. But I saw nothing. No figures, no tracks. I told myself it was nothing, but I didn't sleep. I stayed in the tent, fully awake, listening. Every small noise made my heart race. I kept the flashlight in my lap, the knife close. The rain never stopped. Hours passed. Then, just before dawn, I heard it again. The same sound, the same careful steps. I shot out of the tent, flashlight on, scanning the trees. Nothing. But this time, I noticed something. The door of my truck. It was slightly open. I knew for a fact that I had locked it. A wave of cold ran through me. I stepped forward cautiously, shining my light inside. The glove compartment was open, my map unfolded, my bag unzipped. Someone had been inside. I backed away slowly, my grip tightening on my knife. My brain was racing, trying to make sense of it. I had heard no car, no distant footsteps running away. Whoever had been out here was still close. I grabbed my keys from my pocket, jumped into the truck, and locked the doors. My hands were shaking as I started the engine. The headlights cut through the rain, revealing nothing but trees and wet ground. I didn't waste another second. I turned the truck around and drove. I didn't care about the mud, the narrow path, the risk of getting stuck. I just wanted to get out of there. The drive back felt longer than it should have. Every turn, every shadow between the trees felt like something watching me. By the time I reached the main road, the rain was letting up. The sky was growing lighter, but my nerves were still on edge. I didn't stop driving until I was back in town, back where the lights and buildings made me feel safe again. I never figured out who it was. There were no reports of missing hikers, no known campgrounds nearby, just miles of wilderness. Someone had been out there watching, waiting. I don't know what they wanted, but I know for sure that I wasn't alone that night, and I don't think I ever will be again. I had been looking forward to this camping trip for months. It had been a rough year, and I needed some time alone in the quiet of the woods, away from work, stress, and everything else that had been weighing me down. I chose a spot deep in the forest, miles away from the nearest road. I wanted solitude, peace, and the kind of silence you only find when you're far from civilization. I had been to this area a few times before, though never this deep into the woods. The river that ran through the valley made it an ideal place to set up camp. It provided water for drinking and cooking, and the sound of the running water helped me sleep at night. It was early autumn, and the air had a chill to it, but it was nothing my gear couldn't handle. I arrived in the late afternoon, parking my truck at the end of a dirt road and hiking in with my gear. It was about an hour's walk to the spot I had picked on the map. The sun was low by the time I reached the clearing by the river. I wasted no time setting up my tent, gathering some wood, and starting a fire. As I sat by the flames eating my dinner, I listened to the sounds of the forest, crickets, the occasional hoot of an owl, the rustling of small animals in the underbrush. I felt at peace. The stress I had been carrying for months seemed to fade into the background. I stayed up for a while, staring into the fire, enjoying the warmth against the cool night air. Around midnight, I finally decided to get some sleep. I put out the fire, zipped up my tent, and crawled into my sleeping bag. The river's steady sound lulled me into sleep. I woke up sometime in the night. At first, I wasn't sure what had pulled me out of sleep. Everything was quiet except for the river, but something felt off. That deep, instinctive feeling that something wasn't right. I lay still, listening. The night was darker than before, the fire fully out, my tent illuminated only by the pale glow of the moon filtering through the fabric. Then I heard it, a rustling sound, soft but distinct. It wasn't the small, random movements of an animal. This was deliberate, slow, careful. My body tensed. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The sound came from just outside my tent. I stayed completely still, listening. The rustling stopped. Then, after a long moment, I heard footsteps. Not the four-legged scurry of a raccoon or fox. These were human footsteps, slow, measured. My heart pounded in my chest. I didn't have a weapon, just a small camping knife in my pack. My truck was too far away. I was alone out here. I forced myself to breathe, to think. I had no idea who or what was outside my tent. If I unzipped the door, I'd be exposing myself. If I stayed silent, maybe they would move on. I waited. The footsteps stopped. The only sound was the river. Minutes passed. I didn't dare move. Then, slowly, I reached for the zipper of my tent, moving as quietly as I could. I had to see. I pulled it down just an inch, peeking through the small gap. The fire pit was barely visible in the dim light, just a few feet away. The clearing was empty, but then my eyes adjusted, and I saw him, a man, standing at the edge of the clearing. He was tall, thin, wearing clothes that looked old, tattered. His face was in shadow, but I could see enough. He was staring at my tent. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. He didn't move. He just stood there. Seconds stretched into eternity. Then, as if he sensed me watching, he took a step forward. Then another. I let go of the zipper, backing away into my sleeping bag. My mind raced. Who was he? What did he want? I stayed absolutely still. The footsteps stopped just outside my tent. I gripped my camping knife, my hands shaking. I listened. Nothing. Then, without warning, the side of my tent caved in slightly. Just a small press, like a hand resting against it. Right where my head was. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Minutes passed. The pressure remained. Then, just as suddenly as it had come, it was gone. Silence. I waited, my heart hammering in my chest. Slowly, I reached for my flashlight, gripping it tightly. I had to see. I unzipped the tent just an inch again, shining the light through. The clearing was empty. The man was gone. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat in my tent, knife in hand, listening to every sound. But he never came back. At the first light of dawn, I packed up my gear as fast as I could. I didn't eat, didn't take my time. I just needed to leave. I hiked back to my truck, every step feeling like I was being watched. When I finally reached it, I threw my gear into the back, jumped in, and drove out of there as fast as the dirt road would allow. I didn't look back. I don't know who he was. I don't know what he wanted. But I do know one thing, he wasn't lost. He wasn't some harmless wanderer. He had been waiting, watching, and that thought still keeps me awake at night. I don't know if I'll ever go camping again. I used to enjoy it. The quiet, the break from everything. Just me, the trees, the smell of the fire, the sound of the wind moving through the branches. But after what happened that last night, I don't think I can ever sit alone in the woods without feeling watched. It was late September. The air had started turning cold, but it wasn't winter yet. I had a few days off work, and I wanted some time to clear my head. Life had been exhausting, work stress, bills stacking up, and I just needed to be away from all of it. I picked a spot deep in the woods, a place I had camped before. It wasn't a popular site. No marked trails, no campgrounds, just a clearing near a small creek. A couple of years back, I had found it while hiking, and since then, it had been my go-to place. Nobody ever went there. It was far enough from any roads that you wouldn't hear cars. just the sounds of the forest. I liked that. I drove as far as the dirt road would take me, then hiked the last couple of miles to the spot. It was exactly as I had remembered. Untouched, peaceful, just the way I liked it. I set up camp, gathered some wood for the fire, and settled in for the night. The first 2 nights were perfect. Cool air, clear skies, and nothing but the sounds of crickets and the occasional rustling in the underbrush. Normal sounds, the kind of noises you expect when you're out there. But the last night was different. Started small, just little things. At first, I noticed the woods had gone silent. Anyone who's spent time outside knows what that means. When the crickets stop, when the birds go quiet, when even the wind feels like it's holding its breath, that's never good. I was sitting by the fire when I realized it. The only sound was the crackling of the flames. No insects, no owls, just dead silence. Put me on edge, but I told myself it was nothing. Maybe a predator was nearby, fox, a coyote, even a bear, though I had never seen one in this area before. Then I heard something. It was faint, just a single snap of a branch off in the trees behind my tent. I turned my head, scanning the darkness beyond the firelight. I didn't see anything. Could have been anything. A falling branch, an animal moving through the brush. But it felt wrong. I stayed by the fire longer than usual that night. I didn't want to go into the tent, not yet. Something about the silence, the way it wrapped around me, made my skin crawl. Another sound, closer this time, a footstep, not an animal. Animals move differently. They're quick, light. Whatever this was, it was careful, slow, deliberate. I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it toward the trees. The beam cut through the darkness, but there was nothing there. Just trees, thick trunks stretching up into the black sky. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was just on edge because of the silence. But I wasn't imagining it, because then I saw something. Not a person, not clearly, just movement, a shadow shifting between the trees, deeper in the woods. It was far, but not far enough. I stood up. My chest felt tight, my breath shallow. I wasn't scared yet, but I was close. I wasn't carrying a gun, just a small knife and a hatchet for splitting firewood. Not much use if someone was out there. I waited. Nothing. The shadow didn't move again. The woods stayed silent. I told myself to relax, to stop overthinking, but my gut told me otherwise. I didn't go into the tent. Not that night. I kept the fire going, feeding it more wood than I needed to, keeping the light bright. Then I heard it again. Footsteps. Closer. I spun around, flashlight in hand, but there was nothing. And then the worst part. The fire shifted. A breeze? No. Something had moved on the other side of it. Something had disturbed the flames, made them flicker, shift. Something had stepped closer. I don't know how long I stood there, gripping my flashlight, my breath caught in my throat. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I spoke. Not words, just a noise. A low, sharp noise, like a warning. And whatever was out there moved back. Not away, just back. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the fire until the first hint of morning light broke through the trees. And as soon as it did, I packed up. Fast. I didn't eat. Didn't even bother breaking down the tent properly. I just grabbed my gear, shoved it into my pack, and left. The whole way back, I felt it. The eyes. Watching. Not following, but there. Just beyond the trees. I didn't stop until I reached my car. I threw my pack in the back, got in, and locked the doors. Then I sat there, breathing. I told myself I was being stupid, that I had overreacted, that it was nothing. Then I saw the footprints. Not mine, not a bear's, not an animal's. Human, leading from the woods to my campsite, and then away, not following me, not running, just leaving, like they had been there all night, watching. I never went back, and I never will. I used to think I knew the woods, spent my whole life hiking, hunting, and camping. Always felt safer out there than I did in any city. The woods don't lie. If you pay attention, they'll tell you everything you need to know. But I wasn't paying enough attention that weekend. It was early October, somewhere deep in the forests of Montana. I'd driven out on a Friday after work, planning to spend the whole weekend camping. It wasn't my first time in this area. I'd come out here every fall, setting up near a quiet little river where the fish were always biting, and the game trails ran thick through the trees. I had my rifle, my knife, my tent, everything I needed to be out there for days. The first night was normal. Cool air, stars bright enough to make you feel small, the sound of the river rolling over the rocks. I made a fire, cooked up some kin stew, and stretched out in my tent, letting the sounds of the forest settle around me. Owls hooted in the distance. Leaves rustled as small animals moved through the underbrush. I slept easy. The next day, I woke up early and set out to hunt. The woods were quiet in the way they always are in the morning, the kind of stillness that makes you feel like you're the only thing alive out there. I tracked a deer for most of the morning, finally lining up a good shot just before noon. Dropped it clean, one bullet through the heart. I dressed the deer where it fell, hung the meat in a tree to keep it safe from scavengers, and packed up the rest to bring back to camp. That's when I started noticing things were off. The woods felt different. Not louder, not quieter, just wrong. Like something was watching me. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see a bear or a mountain lion, but there was nothing there. The trees were thick, the underbrush was dense, but I knew those woods. If there had been something following me, I should have been able to hear it. Back at camp, I built up my fire and started preparing some of the meat. The feeling of being watched never left. It wasn't paranoia. It wasn't some city-bred fear of the dark. It was real, a weight pressing down on me, making my skin crawl. That night, I didn't sleep as easy. I kept waking up, listening. The usual sounds were there: wind in the trees, the river running, the occasional crack of a branch. But there was something else, too. Something moving. I told myself it was just an animal. Maybe a coyote. Maybe a bear catching the scent of my meat. But it didn't sound right. It didn't move right. A bear moves with weight. You hear the paws pressing into the earth, the heavy breathing, the slow, deliberate steps. Coyote moves quick, light on its feet. But whatever this was, it moved in bursts, silent, then fast, then silent again. I sat up, grabbed my rifle, and waited. The fire had burned low, just glowing embers now. My breath felt too loud in my ears. Then, just beyond the edge of camp, I saw something. It was low to the ground, too big to be a coyote, too thin to be a bear. The light from the embers barely reached it, but I saw enough. Long limbs, a head that was turned at the wrong angle, like it was trying to listen, not look. I raised my rifle, and in that instant it moved. Not like an animal, not like anything I'd ever seen before. 1 second, it was crouched by the trees. The next, it was further away, near the river. It didn't run. It didn't leap. It just changed position. Like my eyes had skipped a few frames. Like I'd looked away without meaning to. I stayed awake the rest of the night, rifle in my lap. Fire built back up as high as it would go. The next morning, I found tracks near my camp, but they didn't make sense. They started and stopped in places they shouldn't. Like whatever had been there wasn't walking so much as placing its feet in different spots without crossing the space between. I packed up, fast, left most of the meat behind, just grabbed what I could carry and started heading back to my truck. It was a long hike, a few miles through rough terrain, but I didn't stop. Halfway there, I started hearing it again. That sound. The one that wasn't quite movement, wasn't quite stillness. And then I heard my own voice. Not in my head, not as an echo. Ahead of me, it was calling my name. I didn't answer, didn't stop moving. The sound followed me all the way back to my truck, keeping pace just beyond the trees. I could feel it watching. I got in, locked the doors, and started the engine. The woods were still. Nothing moved. Then, just before I put the truck in gear, I saw it again. Standing at the tree line, too far to make out details, but close enough that I knew it was looking at me. It raised its arm, not in a wave, not in a threat, just raised it like it was testing something. I didn't wait to find out what. I drove out of there and didn't look back. I haven't been back to that part of the woods since. I still go camping, still go hunting, but never alone, and never that deep. I had been planning the trip for weeks. I wanted to get away from everything: work, city noise, and people. Just me, the quiet of nature, and the cold air of early autumn. I chose a spot deep in the woods, a place I had found a couple of years ago while hiking. It wasn't an official campsite, just a clearing surrounded by thick trees, far enough from any trails that I could be completely alone. That was the appeal of it. I packed light but made sure I had everything: a tent, my sleeping bag, enough food and water for 3 days, and my hunting knife. Not that I expected to need it for anything, but I always brought it with me on trips like this. I also carried a small hatchet for chopping wood and a flashlight with extra batteries. I didn't take my phone. No reception out here, and besides, the point was to disconnect. It took a few hours of driving and another hour of hiking before I reached the spot. The trees were tall and thick, their leaves just beginning to turn orange and red. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine. It was perfect. I set up my tent, got a small fire going, and sat back to enjoy the quiet. The first day passed peacefully. I walked around, gathered some firewood, cooked a simple meal over the fire, and watched the stars come out. It felt good to be alone, surrounded by nothing but the sounds of the forest. No traffic, no voices, just the occasional rustling of leaves as the wind moved through the trees. But that night, something felt off. I woke up in the middle of the night for no reason. I lay still, listening. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, and the woods were silent. Too silent. No wind, no insects, nothing. I had been camping enough times to know that wasn't normal. The forest was never completely quiet. I stayed still, waiting, listening. After a few minutes, I heard something. A soft crunch, like a footstep on dried leaves. It was close. I held my breath, gripping the knife I had kept near my sleeping bag. My tent was zipped shut, but the thin fabric wouldn't stop anything from getting in. I waited, my ears straining in the darkness. Another footstep, then another. It wasn't an animal. The steps were slow, deliberate. A deer or a bear would have moved differently, faster or in an unpredictable pattern. This was steady, like someone walking carefully. Then silence again. I lay there for what felt like hours, gripping the knife so tightly my hands started to cramp. Eventually, exhaustion won. I must have fallen asleep because the next thing I knew, the sun was rising, filling the tent with pale light. I stepped out, looking around. Nothing seemed out of place. No tracks, no signs of anything unusual. I convinced myself it had been my imagination, just my mind playing tricks on me in the dark. The second day was uneventful. I spent most of it hiking, exploring the woods, and enjoying the solitude. But as the sun began to set, that uneasy feeling returned. I couldn't shake the thought that something had been near my tent the night before. I built my fire larger than usual, letting the flames burn high. I ate my dinner, but my appetite wasn't there. I kept glancing around, scanning the trees, listening. The feeling of being watched wouldn't leave me. As the fire died down and I climbed into my tent, I kept my knife in my hand again. This time, I struggled to fall asleep. Every little noise made me tense up, listening, waiting. Then I heard it again. A footstep, closer than before. I held my breath, my grip on the knife tightening. The sound came again, slow and deliberate. Then, something touched the side of my tent. It was light, just a brush against the fabric, but it was enough. My blood turned to ice. I didn't move. I barely breathed. Whoever or whatever was out there was right next to my tent. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the sound stopped. Minutes passed, maybe an hour. I didn't know. I stayed awake, waiting for something to happen, but nothing did. Eventually, exhaustion won again, and I drifted off. Morning came and I checked around my campsite. Again, nothing. No footprints, no broken branches, no sign that anything had been there. But I knew what I had heard. I should have packed up and left right then. But I told myself it was paranoia, just the isolation getting to me. I had one more night before I planned to head home. I convinced myself to stay. That night was different. I kept the fire burning longer, adding more wood every hour. But eventually, I had to let it die down. The moment the last embers faded, the forest felt different, heavy. Then I heard it. Not just footsteps, breathing. It was close, just outside my tent. A slow, steady inhale, then exhale. I didn't move. The breathing continued for what felt like an eternity. Then silence. And then the zipper of my tent moved. It didn't open all the way, just a few inches, but it was enough for me to see it. And
staring in.
I reacted without thinking. I slashed out with my knife, hitting something solid. A grunt of pain. The tent shook as something fell back. I grabbed my flashlight, flicking it on as I tore out of the tent. The light cut through the darkness, revealing a man. Tall, thin, his clothes dirty and torn. Blood dripped from his arm where my knife had cut him. His eyes locked onto mine. He didn't run. He just stood there, breathing heavily. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my hatchet and my bag and ran. I didn't care about leaving my tent behind. I just ran. Branches tore at my skin as I crashed through the trees, my flashlight bouncing with each step. I didn't look back. I could hear him behind me, moving fast. My truck was miles away, but I ran. My legs burned, my lungs screamed, but I didn't stop. The footsteps behind me never faded. He was keeping pace. Then I saw it, a road, not the one I had driven in on, but a dirt road cutting through the woods. It didn't matter where it led. I ran for it, praying for anything. Another car, a house, anything. Then I heard something else. An engine. Headlights appeared in the distance. A truck. I stumbled into the road, waving my arms. The truck skidded to a stop, the driver shouting something I didn't hear. I turned back toward the trees. He was gone. The driver took me into town. I told the police everything. They searched the woods but found nothing. No man, no tracks, no sign of him. Just my torn-up campsite and my abandoned tent. They said it was probably a drifter, someone living out there. But I knew better. That man wasn't just passing through. He had been watching me, waiting, and I had almost waited too long. I never went camping alone again. The rain had started as a drizzle that morning, but by the time I pulled off the highway, it was steady and cold. The kind of rain that soaks into everything, makes the air heavy, and settles into your bones no matter how many layers you wear. I hadn't planned on camping in the rain, but I also hadn't planned on camping alone. If things had gone the way they were supposed to, I would have been setting up a tent with my wife, helping her get a fire going, listening to her complain about how I always packed too much food. But things didn't go the way they were supposed to. She had been gone for almost a year. I hadn't camped since then. The grief had been relentless, something I carried with me everywhere. It sat in my chest, a weight that never lifted, a constant reminder of the life I had lost. I thought maybe coming out here would help. Maybe the silence of the woods, the smell of damp pine, the sound of rain on canvas. Maybe it would be enough to make me feel like myself again. I turned onto a narrow dirt road, the tires of my truck slipping slightly in the mud. I had picked a remote spot, far from any campgrounds, far from any people. Just a small clearing near a lake, tucked into the woods where no one would bother me. It was the kind of place we would have loved, where we could have spent the whole weekend without seeing another person. The road narrowed as I drove, branches scraping the sides of the truck, mud splattering up onto the windshield. After a few more miles, I found the turnoff and pulled into the clearing. The rain had eased a little, but the sky was still dark, the air thick with the smell of wet earth. I killed the engine and sat there for a moment, listening to the rain against the roof, my fingers gripping the steering wheel. It felt strange to be out here alone. I took a deep breath, then got out. The ground was soft under my boots, the mud clinging to my soles as I walked to the back of the truck. I pulled out my gear, setting up the tent as quickly as I could in the rain. My fingers were already numb from the cold, but I forced myself to keep moving. The tent went up without too much trouble, and I threw my sleeping bag inside before setting up a small tarp to keep my firewood dry. I had brought everything I needed: food, water, extra clothes. But as I stood there, staring out at the lake through the misty rain, I realized how empty it all felt. She should have been here. I shook the thought away and focused on making a fire. It took longer than usual, the damp wood refusing to catch at first, but eventually, I got a small flame going. I sat beside it, eating a sandwich I didn't really want, listening to the quiet. There was something peaceful about the rain. The way it softened everything, made the world feel smaller. But there was also something unsettling about it. The way it distorted sounds, made it harder to tell what was close and what was far away. I tried not to think about that. The daylight faded quicker than I expected. The heavy clouds made everything darker, and by the time I crawled into my tent, the woods around me had disappeared into blackness. The wind picked up not long after. At first, it was just a steady breeze, rustling through the trees, but as the night went on, it grew stronger. The tarp I had set up flapped loudly, and the trees groaned as the wind moved through them. I pulled my sleeping bag tighter around me, trying to ignore it. Somewhere in the distance, a branch cracked. I told myself it was just the wind. Another crack, this time closer. I sat up, listening. The rain had slowed, but the wind was still there, carrying sounds through the trees. I tried to focus, to pick out something familiar, but everything blurred together. The wind, the rain, the creaking trees. Then I heard it. A single, deliberate footstep. Not an animal. Not the wind. Something walking. I held my breath, my heart pounding. I had picked this spot because no one else would be out here. No roads nearby, no trails. I was miles from anyone, or at least I should have been. I reached for the flashlight beside me, but I didn't turn it on. If someone was out there, I didn't want to give away my position. I just listened, waiting. For a long time, there was nothing. Then another step. Closer. A slow, careful movement, like someone trying not to make noise. I felt the hair on my arms rise. My body tensed. I thought about calling out, but I stopped myself. If someone was out there, I didn't want to let them know I was awake. Instead, I waited. The next sound wasn't a step. It was the soft rustle of fabric. Breathing. Someone was standing just outside my tent. I gripped the flashlight, my mind racing. If they had a weapon, if they were here to rob me, I was in trouble. My truck was too far to get to without being seen. My only option was to wait. The breathing stayed there, just outside. A long, slow inhale, then silence. Then, after what felt like forever, another step. Moving away. The sound faded, swallowed by the wind and the trees. I stayed awake the rest of the night, every muscle in my body tense, waiting for them to come back. But they didn't. By the time the sun came up, I was exhausted. I unzipped the tent slowly, stepping out into the cold morning air. Everything looked the same except for one thing. A single, muddy footprint. Not mine. Too big to be hers. Fresh. I packed up my gear in record time, throwing everything into the truck without caring if it was wet or muddy. I didn't look back as I drove away, my tires spinning in the mud as I got back onto the dirt road. I never went back to that spot. I never camped alone again. I don't know who was out there that night, and I don't want to know. All I know is that someone was watching me, waiting, and that was enough.